He's usually a little late. It being 6 o'clock, I call the February 2023 Town of Clayton Planning Board meeting to order. For roll call, board members Spence and Williams are not present at this time. Will all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Next, do we have any adjustments to the agenda? Board Member Liscombe.
I have two conflicts. One on item 5A, seats. I do not have a direct ownership interest in that, but I was a partner in item 20. I also have ownership. I feel like it is a guest use for that property, but I should say, vote on that. 5. Companies like that.
Thank you. We accept your abstention on 5B. What is the will of the board on Mr. Liscombe's comments on 5A?
You don't have any financial interest in anything?
I have no direct financial with this. Just a business partner on other things. Just
I apologize. I had asked Board Member Lipscomb if he had any financial interest in 5A tonight.
And I do not have any direct financial interest, but I was involved in the overall subdivision. And I do have 3 buildings in that development, but no financial interest in this particular application.
Thank you. Any other comments? Does the board wish to allow Mr. Liscombe to sit on 5A or to abstain? It's just a consensus. It appears that we have a consensus, a majority consensus of, or in fact, I think seeing all the board members present feel that Ms. Galiscom can sit and make a rendering on 5A. That being said, we'll move to item 4, approval of the minutes. Are there any adjustments to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Motion.
I have a motion by Board Member Lee to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Powers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes. Next on the agenda is 5A, 2022-146-CZM, Academy Point, Phase 10. We're now here from Mr. Howard, the Planning Director.
Good evening, Planning Board members. So this first item in front of you tonight is the Academy Point Phase 10 Conditional Zoning District. The request is to rezone property from B2 zoning district to a conditional zoning residential district. It would allow up to 33 multifamily units spread across 3 buildings. The density for Phase 10 alone would be 27.27 units per acre. However, the overall density for Academy Point, which this would be a phase of that development, would be 12.81 units per acre. The property size is 1.210 acres, and it's located on O'Neill Street at Rosemary Street. One other thing I just want to point out before I move on with my presentation, Academy Point was approved a number of years ago as a planned development. In 2020, when amendments were done to the Unified Development Code, that planned development zoning was removed and replaced with conditional zoning, and we have transitional provisions laid out in the Unified Development Code that allow additions or amendments to existing planned developments to come through as conditional zoning districts, which is why you're seeing this new phase of Academy Point come through as a conditional zoning district. Here you see the Academy Point master plan. The parcel outlined in red or maroon color is Phase 10. As you can see, it would have access from Rosemary Street, an existing alley in Academy Point, as well as cross-access from the existing multifamily units in Academy Point. Again, the proposed use is for multifamily units, a maximum of 33 units at a density of 27.27 units per acre just for Phase 10. Access would be from Rosemary Street, as well as cross-access through the existing Academy Point development. Water, sewer, and electric, all provided by the town of Clayton. And as you can see, it is surrounded, for the most part, by Academy Point, and then on the other side of the road, RE zoning and some R8 zoning, which is an existing residential neighborhood. You'll see the proposed dimensional standards there for the apartment building, as well as the trip generation table. Because this is considered an additional phase of Academy Point, they looked at how many additional trips this would add. And it would add 5 additional daily trips, 9 additional AM peak hour trips, and 12 additional PM peak hour trips. While no additional transportation improvements are required due to a TIA, the developer will be required to make O'Neill Street frontage improvements in accordance with our transportation plan. The project will comply with Town of Clayton stormwater ordinance as well, and it'll access public water both on Rosemary Street and through other phases in Academy Point, and will in fact, if you've read the master plan narrative, will create a water loop through the Academy Point development. Existing public sewers also available in adjacent phases of Academy Point, and electric service is available from the Town of Clayton. While this particular phase will not require any landscape buffering, The applicant is proposing a landscape buffer with a 6-foot-tall fence to be provided between Phase 10 and the existing single-family homes in Phase 2, with all on their interior landscaping and street yard trees meeting UDC requirements. There are some architectural standards provided in the master plan narrative, but if you read that, you'll see essentially they are planning to match the existing multifamily buildings in Academy Point and utilize board and batten and brick facades. The 2045 growth plan calls for this area to be high-density residential, which provides for housing near major transportation corridors, existing commercial areas in downtown, and provides for a gross density of up to 10 units per acre. While the proposed density is higher than envisioned in the 2045 growth plan, staff does believe this phase is a continuation of existing development on either side and would be consistent with the general area. The current zoning permits commercial uses, but the property is surrounded by residential uses. The proposed conditional zoning district would permit high-density multifamily development and would be served by public water and public sewer. The area currently is a mix of residential uses, multifamily, townhomes, and single-family detached, with the proposed conditional zoning district allowing for additional suburban-style multifamily development consistent with the surrounding properties. The proposed development would likely be served by Cooper Academy, Clayton Middle, and Clayton High Schools. Cooper Academy and Clayton High School are both on the 2022-2023 CAP school list for Johnson County, but as a reminder, that CAP school list can change every year, and this development would likely still be 1 to 2 years out from being occupied. The development will be accessed by Rosemary Street as well as internal cross access to Academy Point. Because this is a phase of Academy Point development, the open space calculation, it falls into the open space calculation of the total development. However, the Phase 10 will have its own recreational amenity. The development will be served by existing sewer infrastructure on site and is subject to the town wastewater allocation policy, so that its wastewater allocation will be approved by town council if this development is proposed to be, if you recommend approval of it and town council approves the development. Public water is available on Rosemary Street and in Academy Point, and stormwater will follow the town stormwater ordinance, and all town ordinances, procedures, and approvals will be followed. The development will be cohesive with Academy Point, and improvements to existing public road network connectivity and public utility extensions should mitigate any potential impacts to adjoining property owners. And with the imposed conditions, staff does not believe there will be detriment to the general public. As you'll see on the screen there's a list of the master plan approval criteria from the Unified Development Code, and staff believes the applicant has met the criteria through the master plan narrative, and the proposed conditions. Some considerations for this board. You shall make a recommendation to the town council, and the recommendation shall include a written statement of reasonableness and consistency. The board may recommend conditions be added or removed. However, the applicant must agree to any changes in those conditions. And if approved, the conditional zoning district master plan and narrative will be recorded with Johnston County and will run with the land and do not expire. Staff is recommending approval of Academy Point Phase 10 conditional zoning district master plan subject to the 16 recommended conditions of approval, which I'll go through now. As you'll see on your screen, the first 3 conditions are our standard conditions. Condition 4 addresses the uses and standards, and Condition 5 addresses the landscape buffer. Condition 6 addresses architectural elevations. 7 addresses stormwater. Condition 8 addresses the amount of parking to be provided. And Condition 9 addresses provision of a dumpster for the proposed development. Condition 10 addresses screening of the HVAC units, and condition 11 addresses the requirement for a sidewalk along the O'Neill Street and Rosemary Street frontage. Condition 12 addresses other frontage improvements to O'Neill Street. Condition 13 addresses access to the proposed development. Condition 14 requires that Town of Clayton shall be the electric provider, and condition 15 addresses a limitation of density for the phase, and condition 16 is again our standard condition that if there are any conflicts, the conditions control. And finally, staff has provided a recommended statement of consistency and reasonableness on the screen. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. The applicant is also here and ready to make a presentation as well.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Howell? Mr. Powers?
I'm not sure. I may have misheard something. We're talking about 33 apartments. And what I heard on the traffic study was that there's going to be an increase of nine cars per day,
No, five
Yes, sir.
5 in the daytime.
5 cars per day out of 33 apartments. That doesn't seem logical to me. Why would not each apartment be going to work every day, or hopefully going to work every day in a car?
And that I really can't address. It has to do with how the projected or expected trip generation is developed. I don't know, the applicant may have their transportation consultant here to speak to that, or they may have some transportation expertise speak to that, but I really cannot speak to, how the trip generation comes out that way. Other than if you'll notice, while the additional daily trips is is at 5, there are more trips during the AM and PM peak hours.
Anyone else? Just leave it. Could you leave the slide there? Any other board member have any questions for staff? Mr. Howell, I agree with Mr. Powers. When I see numbers like that, it's almost like it's not reasonable. And when you see numbers like that, knowing that there are 33 apartments, which means there could be anywhere from 33, let's say 2 adults, to 66, 70 adults living there, and you're saying that the additional AM peak in the morning hours would be 9 additional trips. The reason I was just thinking about it, when I'm sitting home looking out my window and watching my neighbors that are working from home come and go all day, and I know when my daughter's in school, I make 4 trips without going to drop her off at school, drop her off at school, come back home, afternoon. That's 4 daily trips without even going anywhere else. And just in my neighborhood, just watching my neighbors, their daily trips, just looking out the window, there's a random subjective sample. That's not reasonable, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
My second question is.
One quick thing I will note that I forgot to mention on the first question about this. The applicant is here and he is prepared to address that concern. B, one thing that I didn't point out is that, and it's in the footnotes on the screen there under the table, the trip generations were done, these newest trip generations for this new phase were done using a newer volume of the trip generation manual. So that's where you'll see there. So every couple of years or so, the Institute for Transportation Engineers comes out with a new trip generation manual where they have refined the methods for figuring out how many trips may be generated. And so what they've done here is they actually recalculated, and I think the applicant can clarify this if I'm wrong, but I think what they've done here is they've recalculated the trip generation for the total development based on the newest trip generation manual. But that trip generation presented in the November 2018 TIA was from the old trip generation manual. So it's not it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison. What they have said is that if you take the entire development and add in these new apartments and recalculate the trip generation for the entire development, you would get 2,345 daily trips. In 2018, using the previous version of the trip generation manual, the entire development minus these 33 new apartments generated 2,340 trips. And so that's how you come up with an increase of 5. And part of that's because in the newer manual, I would guess, I haven't looked at it, but my assumption is in the newer manual, they lowered the number of trips generated by each apartment because there's a newer, what they call a low-rise use that was added, I think. And so that's some of the reasoning for the differences, but the applicant may also be able to provide some additional clarification on that.
Okay, thank you. I do have, does any other board member have a question?
Sorry, Chair Moore, I think I interrupted you. You were getting ready to ask another question.
No, but I was going to give the other board members an opportunity first. I think Board Member Applewhite?
One question, you had mentioned the applicant had agreed to provide a condition to provide a buffer between the new development and existing development. Was that listed in the conditions that I missed?
So they did not propose, that particular buffer was not added into the conditions, I believe, but so the only condition related to the buffer is the fact that there's not required to be a buffer between this phase and the previous phases of Academy Point. They're currently, in Phase 8, there was required to be a buffer along the property line with this property, so they are proposing to remove that because this will be a cohesive development. So in their master plan narrative, they did address that they would include a buffer and a fence, but it is not a condition because it's not required by code.
Any other board member? One follow-up. I know one of the concerns that we've heard, and I know this project, we're entering Phase 10, but it's been brought to the board's attention in the past about Academy Overlook in the various phases is adequate parking. And I noticed for 33 units, it's only allocated for 43 parking spaces. And it appears, once again, that's been the theme in my years on the planning board about, especially that particular development, about the lack of adequate parking. And here we go again in Phase 10, 33 units with 43 parking spaces. And I think we can already see that's probably going to be inadequate. It's going to lead to some of the same congestion and issues that we've heard in the past. Is there something in the town ordinance that we can look at in the future, or is coming up as we're going through some changes in the minimum required parking?
Yeah, we can certainly look at our parking requirements in the town code. Currently, the way the code is written, 1-bedroom apartments require 1 parking space, 2-bedroom apartments require 2 or more bedroom apartments require 2 parking spaces, and then 1 guest or visitor space is required for every 4 apartments. If you look at the narrative, most of these apartments are proposed to be 1 bedroom. I think there's only 1 or 2 2-bedroom apartments in each building. And so that is why their parking count is lower, because they're almost all 1-bedroom apartments, but then we require the additional parking space for visitors, both for visitors, but also for the circumstances where there may be some 1-bedroom apartments where 2 people with 2 cars live in them. So, but that is certainly something we can look at as part of our code rewrite as well, is our parking ratio. It's a fine balance to go there, to look at between requiring adequate parking, but not requiring too much parking.
Okay. And just doing a quick calculation in my head, you said 1 visitor parking spaces for 4 units, per 4 units. So that's at least 8 visitor parking spaces plus 33 units, that's 41. So that would lead me to believe, without looking at the numbers, there's only 2 2-bedroom units in the 33 units. by what you just said.
Yeah, and that may be the case. I cannot remember what the breakdown of units are. But certainly, as they move through, if this conditional zoning is approved as they move into site plan review, that's something that we would ensure that their parking met the requirements in the code. So, they would, if they only have space for 43 parking spaces, they would only be able to put as many units in those buildings as that number of parking spaces would allow by our code.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Howell?
I have one question. The parking code would stand alone for this phase, so you wouldn't be able to count any extra spaces for the other phases that might have been one or two over what they were, or am I back?
Correct. So we have to look at this as its own thing. Now, because it will be interconnected with the other phases, they certainly may be able to share parking. It'll, ultimately that'll be dependent on how the applicant sets everything up. But the big thing that we look at is that their parking meets our requirements. But if you look at phase 10 in combination with the two phases directly next to it that are the other buildings, or the one phase that has the other buildings, there may be more than enough adequate parking between the two. But from a code perspective, we have to look at phase 10 on its own.
Thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll now hear from the applicant.
Good evening, David DeYoung with Riverwild. Address is 114 West Main Street, Clayton, North Carolina. And Ben's helping me out here. Thank you. Will this work for this? Okay, so yeah, got it. All right, thanks for having us tonight. I brought my team with us, the consultant team. We have Amy Kraut with Smith Anderson, Tim Somerville with Stewart, he's our engineer. And I have Christine Woodall and Allie Burr with Riverwild as well. All right, so I wanted to provide a little additional information from what Ben presented. There are some similarities between our two presentations, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but I'll try to answer all the questions you guys had during his presentation. This is the Academy Point development. This is a recent aerial. We took it last week, I believe. You can see in this aerial the subject site. That's the 3 buildings that are dead center. And then you can see the apartments that are flanking to the left and to the right. The rest of the subdivision is single family, and it heads back towards Cooper Academy all the way to the far side on Mile Street. This site is the southeast corner of Rosemary and O'Neill Street. So Academy Point was originally approved for 9 phases in 2017, and some of the confusion that we're having about traffic is because of phase 10. Phase 10 is the white at the top of the screen in between the orange apartment buildings. That was originally included in the overall project, and it was originally included in the traffic study. And at the time it included 44 apartments. It was going to be 4 additional buildings on the site. But it was withdrawn from, we withdrew that portion from the application because we did not come to terms at that time with the property owner. So we did not acquire it at that time, we acquired it later. So the original Academy Point was approved for the 133 single family homes, the 12 townhome lots that are on Oakdale Avenue, and 110 apartments. There's 11 apartments per building. So again, phase 10 was the hole in the donut, shown here a little bit more clear. You can see the other phases. And just for perspective, phase on this drawing here, you can see phase 9 includes 4 buildings. Phase 10 was going to include 4 buildings, and we reduced that to 3 buildings for a number of reasons, including the ability to provide an amenity, a playground area on the site, and actually we can get more parking than what's required by code. We just showed on the master plan that we would meet the code requirement, but we anticipate being able to provide more parking on this site than the other phases had, because the other phases met the parking requirement exactly. So as Ben said, The current zoning of the property is B2. B2 is neighborhood commercial, and the existing use today is vehicle repair and service and storage. Some of the permitted uses that could go here, obviously the continuation of the existing use could continue as it is already existing, would be a C-store with gas sales, financial institution, hotel, motel, laundry services, and offices. I just selected those because those are all permitted uses in the B2. So with the B2 zoning, it would just go in for regular site plan approval with the town. This gives you a little aerial imagery. This is looking north on North O'Neill Street. You can see the apartments in phases 6 and 7 to the north. You can see the last apartment in phases 8 and 9 to the south, and the 3 buildings along the frontage. Turning it around and now facing down back towards downtown, you can see the 4 buildings in phases 8 and 9, and the location of the 3 existing buildings. This is a blow-up of the specific site. You can see the 3 buildings very clearly here, the outdoor storage that is associated with the 3 buildings, and you can certainly see that the building that's closest to Rosemary is heavily damaged. It's got missing roof tiles, and clearly we're not storing anything in that building at this time. We're only using the front 2 buildings for vehicle repair and storage. So as Ben said, the zoning that we're proposing is R6 conditional zoning. That would allow us to build the 3 buildings or 33 apartments. We will include the active open space that I already talked about and the tot lot. And our parking will meet or exceed the code requirements. Some of the other features that will be on the site is clearly we're going to have consistent architecture. These buildings will look exactly like the 10 buildings that are there now. We'll have the landscape buffers, which were discussed. We will have open space. We will have sidewalks that will continue from the current phase over to Rosemary. And then obviously you can go now from downtown all the way to Oakdale Avenue across the entire frontage of the other 6 buildings on the other side of Rosemary. We will have curb and gutter in this section. If you look back in the previous aerials, you'll see that there is no sidewalks, no curb, no gutter along this. One of the benefits of having those things added here is obviously when it feels a little less wide, traffic kind of slows down too. So being this a 25-mile-an-hour zone on North O'Neill, we would hope that traffic will stay within that speed limit. And of course, we will have stormwater control associated with this phase as well. So, as Ben said, it is consistent with the Growth Plan 2045. This parcel is designated as high density on the future land use map. Obviously, B2 is not zoned here, so this little hole in the donut is kind of antiquated zoning. You clearly wouldn't want commercial uses here in the long run. You'd want to push those commercial uses onto Main Street where they belong. We will be meeting all the requirements of the Unified Development Code, including parking requirements. We are consistent with the design guidelines of the town, and we will be providing amenities and sidewalk connectivity, as well as architectural consistency. And as stated before, we will comply with the engineering design guidelines and stormwater management policies of the town. So, as clarification, the original TIA included 44 apartments on this site. So when you see the new traffic generation analysis, you have to remember that when we analyze the current 33 apartments, that's actually a reduction of 11 apartments from the previous approved traffic impact analysis. We have multiple points of access, which Ben mentioned, through the existing apartments to the south, through the site up to Rosemary. There will be a right-in, right-out on Rosemary, and there's access to that alley that runs along phase 2 of Academy Point. Our required traffic improvements, since we were talking about traffic in general with Academy Point, we had several improvements that were required to be made for Academy Point whole, and that included O'Neill Street, Oakdale Avenue, and Rosemary Street. As you may notice now, if you drive down North O'Neill, there's a left-hand turn lane heading into town that goes onto Rosemary Street. That was added by this project to allow additional traffic to get off of O'Neill Street and onto Rosemary. We added the curb and gutter along the frontage of the existing phases. We resurfaced all the roads, O'Neill, Rosemary, and Wilson Street, two of them which lead back to Cooper Academy. And of course, requisite sidewalks and handicap ramps with each phase. So when we updated the trip generation letter, and this is exactly what Ben showed in his presentation in 2022, we had Exalt analyze it, and of course they had to use the latest trip generation manual, so there was changes between the two trip generation manuals. But I think what needs to be noted is we dropped 11 units off of this phase and still added some trips per day. If you look at the third line down, which is the code 220 multifamily housing low rise, that daily trip count for those 143 units, including the 33 we're proposing, equates to about 7 or 8 trips per day. So we're not talking about just 5 trips per day. It's 7 or 8 trips per day per unit overall. So there was an additional 5 because the count actually went up even though we dropped units. DOT reviewed it. There were no additional improvements required by NCDOT, and we are planning to add curb gutter and sidewalks for this phase to be consistent with the other phases along North O'Neill. Ben was pretty thorough on the approval criteria consistency. We agree with his statements. I put the consistency statements here. I'm not going to read them again, but if you wanted me to address anyone in particular, I'd be happy to do so. But I think staff covered it very well. So just in summary, we are requesting the rezoning from B2 to R6 conditional zoning. We do intend to build 3 buildings, not 4, for 33 apartments. We will include amenities, open space, and a tot lot on this site. And we expect parking to meet for sure and probably exceed code requirements since we dropped a building. We haven't laid that out yet. That'll come in through site plan approval. I would expect that we will be exceeding the minimum code requirements with our parking. Our architecture is going to match the existing building architecture, and we are fully in agreement and accepting all of the conditions of approval as recommended by the planning department, and I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions of the applicant? Yeah, Board Member Dupree.
Back on page 10 of your presentation, if you would back up just for a second. That's a quick question about that. There you go. The traffic flow into the development off Rosemary, the little yellow arrow.
Yes.
You said it's a right in, right out. So when someone leaves at that spot, they can't turn back to the left to get to O'Neill, right?
They can't. NCDOT will not allow, because of the proximity of the entrance, NCDOT won't let us make that movement. So.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? I have one question about parking. And I know you've stated that you've met the code. And this is just a philosophical question, and I know the reasonableness of 33 apartments and 44 spaces. And I know you are adhering to the code that as it is today. Where would the overflow park? Because I want to be honest, in today's society, this is not a major city up north with significant public transportation. So we are a commuting area. So most of the people will have cars, so we can assume at least 1 to 2 cars per residence. And I was just wondering, how would we accommodate all the cars for the 33 units, which could be, and I don't like to say a half a person, but as we know, it could be, some of them would be married couples or cohabitating in the one-bedroom units. It just seems that, and this has just been a concern throughout my tenure on the planning board, is that in the evenings, in some of these neighborhoods, such as this project, parking can get horrific. And I was just wondering, is it feasible in your layout to include, as a request, is it possible to include, I'm gonna use the term adequate parking for 33 units?
Well, I think at this stage, it's really hard to design the site. We haven't designed the site yet, clearly. If you look at the plan that's up on the board, you'll notice that at the very top corner of the plan, you can see there is a retention area for stormwater and there's a tot lot area. That's where building 4 was supposed to go. So the 3 buildings that are going on the site will be to the south of that, closer to the other 3 buildings. What does that mean? Practically, it means that we should be able to fit the tot lot, the stormwater control, and the parking spaces that would have normally been in front of building 4 in that area. So without telling you exactly how many parking spaces, I know I can fit what's required by code. And we dropped 1 building because we wanted to put something else there for the residents. So we added the tot lot area up in that area, knowing that that area would also have room for parking. So how many extra spaces is there going to be? I don't know, but it's going to be more than all the other phases of the apartments and definitely more than what's required by code.
All right, thank you. Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public that would like to speak on this particular item? Yes, ma'am. Please come to the stand and state your name and address.
My name is Carrie Lee. I live at 221 East 2nd Street. I had a question that came up, if y'all could answer it for me. So this land is zoned high density, is that what I heard? Is it zoned high density? B2. Okay. And with the 2045 plan, this would be high density if it's rezoned, or would it be the mid-level?
The 2045 growth plan calls for this to be high density.
Okay, because in your report, I thought it said something about, I don't know. That's why I just wanted to clarify. So it would be high density? Yes. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So I'm the president of the PTA at Cooper Academy. And so I drive and drop my kids off at school a lot. I'm there a lot. And I just know that I've watched buses have a hard time getting around cars that are parked, around Academy Point. And so that to me is a concern with parking, with traffic. It is very hard to turn left off of Rosemary. I do it every day. It's very difficult. So I just would like to bring that forth, just to push the planning board to consider that and what that means for our kids. And it seems like a solution would be to go from 3 buildings to 2. That would help with the parking and the traffic, but I know that that is not, the code is allowing all of this. But I would just like to push our planning board and challenge you to just consider, the traffic and how it impacts our school and our families that are trying to get our kids to school safely. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other member of the public would like to speak on this matter? Thank you. Hearing none, I'll now turn it over to the board for deliberation. Are there any comments from the board?
Chairman Moore, can I just ask one more question?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to go backwards. Just 2 questions, more for clarification's sake for the applicant. When was the original TIA done? And I just want to get clarification, trips means 5 per household? Or is it 5 a day for the entire development?
So The change in the trip distribution was 5 daily trips from what was originally approved in 2017 to what was re-reviewed in 2022 when this application was submitted. I think it was August of 2022. So it's 5 additional total daily trips, but the apartments themselves are actually, out of that 2,500 trips per day, is about 992 of those trips. So on a daily, it's really almost 7 trips per day per unit. I hope that helps. And just for some further clarification, and I know a lot of people don't remember what this area looked like before Academy came into place, but Rosemary Street was a 2-lane street with no signal lights, no street lights, no sidewalks. This development, when it came in, has provided sidewalks on both sides of Rosemary, both sides of Wilson Street. So we're trying to make it as safe as possible. Of course, traffic is just kind of a thing that happens with development, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion from the board to recommend or not recommend.
I'll entertain the motion to recommend. Do I have to read all this? So I never do this. We've just read it. For 2022-146 CZM, Academy Point Phase 10, we find this rezoning action to be generally consistent with the future land use map and the adopted 2045 comprehensive growth plan, and we find this rezoning action reasonable and in the public interest because it supports goals LU1, LU2, LU3, and the 2045 comprehensive growth plan by encouraging growth in appropriate areas, providing a sense of place, and enhancing aesthetics along major corridors and in new developments, and providing a range of housing types, lot sizes to meet the needs of various income levels, family sizes, and ages.
We have a motion by Board Member Bagley. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Applewhite. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Recommendation passes. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 5B, 2022-163-CZM, Highland Park Conditional Zoning District. Board Member Liscombe has abstained from deliberation on this item 5B. We're not hearing from staff. Sorry.
Good evening again. So this is another conditional zoning district request. The request is to rezone property from the residential estate or RE zoning district to a conditional zoning residential district that would allow up to 30 townhome units and 100 apartments with a density of 4.10 units per acre. The property size is 31.7 acres and it's located on North O'Neill Street. This is the proposed master plan for Highland Park. As you can see, they have one entrance proposed off of O'Neill Street, 2 future cross-access points, and they've shown the significant amount of natural area that will have to be preserved and the areas where the apartments and the townhomes may go. And one other thing I'll note here, the black dotted line on the top of the screen hitting north, that would be the proposed greenway connection to the Sam's Branch Greenway, which runs along the edge of this property. Again, they're proposing a mixture of townhome and apartments, a maximum of 130 units, accessed off of North O'Neill Street. Water, sewer, and electric would all be provided by the town of Clayton. The property is surrounded by planned development, zoning, residential estate zoning, and R8 zoning. The dimensional standards are on your screen. They have proposed different dimensional standards for townhomes and the apartments. As far as traffic generation, they did a trip generation memorandum or study that determined that the anticipated trips will not exceed the thresholds in the Unified Development Code, which, as a reminder, those thresholds are 1,000 trips per day or 100 trips in any peak hour. This development is expected to generate 894 daily trips, 64 AM peak hour trips, and 78 PM peak hour trips. While no TIA was required and to determine additional improvements, they will be required to improve the O'Neill Street frontage along the frontage of their development. Stormwater will comply with the Town of Clayton Stormwater Ordinance. Public water is existing and available on North O'Neill Street, and public sewer is existing and available along the Sam's Branch Greenway adjacent to the development, and electric service is also available from the Town of Clayton. The development will have a Class C landscape buffer with opaque screening required around the perimeter of the development. However, in some areas, because of the topography and existing vegetation of the development, there may be areas where the existing vegetation will be used to satisfy the buffer requirements. Interior landscaping and street yard trees will meet Unified Development Code requirements. The applicant is proposing that at least 50% of the property will be preserved as resource conservation area and open space, with the Greenway connection, Sam's Branch Greenway, as well as additional residential amenities are proposed. The architectural standards are provided in the master plan narrative. For the townhomes, they're proposing front door features of either a window or windows in the door, transom window or sidelight window, with limited facade materials for both the townhomes and the proposed apartments of fiber cement siding, brick, stone, wood, vinyl shake, or shingle. The 2045 growth plan calls for this area to be medium density residential, which provides for a gross density of 3 to 5 units per acre and generally less than 50% of the overall area being used for single family attached units. While the proposed density does meet the 2045 growth plan, the growth plan does not necessarily include multifamily units in the medium density residential category, but this development could be seen to provide a transition, and staff has determined that it is generally consistent with the growth plan. The current zoning of the property permits low density residential uses, and it's surrounded by residential uses. The proposed conditional zoning district permits medium density, single family attached and multifamily development, and the applicant is proposing to connect public water and extend public sewer to serve the development. The area is currently a mix of residential uses. In fact, this is just up the road from the previous conditional zoning district request. So it's a mix of multifamily, townhomes, single-family detached residential uses in the area. And this proposed conditional zoning district would allow for additional suburban-style mixed residential development consistent with surrounding property. Again, this development would be served likely by Cooper Academy, Clayton Middle, and Clayton High School, with Cooper Academy and Clayton High on the 2022-2023 CAP school list for Johnson County. As a reminder, this is a moment in time. This development likely would not be built out and occupied for several years, so that CAP school list may change. The development will be accessed off of North O'Neill Street and will include open space residential amenities and a greenway connection to the Sam's Branch Greenway. Development will be served by existing sewer infrastructure along Sam's Branch Greenway and is subject to the town wastewater allocation policy, with water being supplied. It's available on North O'Neill Street, and the development will follow the town stormwater ordinance, and all town ordinances, procedures, and approvals will be followed. The development will generally match the density and unit type of surrounding developments and will make improvements to the existing public road network connectivity and public utility extensions to help mitigate impacts to adjoining property owners. And with the imposed conditions, staff does not believe there will be detriment to the general public. You'll see on the screen here the master plan approval criteria from the Unified Development Code, and staff believes the applicant has met this criteria through the master plan narrative, and proposed conditions. As a reminder of your considerations for this type of application, you shall make a recommendation to the town council, including a written statement of reasonableness and consistency. You may recommend conditions be added or removed. However, the applicant must agree to any change in conditions. And if approved by council, the conditional zoning district master plan and narrative will be recorded with Johnston County and will run with the land and not expire. Staff is recommending approval of the Highland Park Conditional Zoning District Master Plan subject to the 21 recommended conditions. Those conditions are on the screen here, the start of them. Again, the first three are the standard conditions. Condition 4 is requiring annexation. Condition 5 is a limitation on the number of total lots, and that has to do with requirements for a second point of access. And condition 6 is a condition regarding limiting the uses and standards. Condition 7 is a proposed lays out some of the proposed amenities or the amenity options that the developer may choose. Condition 8 is a requirement for the paved greenway connection to Sam's Branch Greenway, including a bridge built to town standards. Condition 9 is, speaks to the public recreation open space land dedication fee in lieu and how that may be calculated and credited if the greenway connection is built to public standards. And condition 10 is a standard condition relating to the Class C buffer and opaque screening, with the addition that the buffer requirements may be met through alternative compliance utilizing existing vegetation and conservation areas. Condition 11 speaks to stormwater. Condition 12 speaks to public water and sewer. Condition 13 speaks to the electric being provided by the town. Condition 14 speaks to the requirement that guest parking be provided for both the townhome and apartment uses at a rate of 1 space per 4 units. Our current code does not require guest parking for townhome units, so that is an addition there. Condition 15 is the requirement that they meet the architectural standards, and condition 16 is a requirement for the future cross-access street stubs. Condition 17 is the requirement that 50% of the total site area be preserved. Condition 18 is relating to the potential for the internal roadways to be owned and maintained by a homeowners association, or ultimately, or possibly by the town, depending if they can build it to public road standards. Condition 19 is relating to the alleys. As proposed, the alleyways likely will be designed and signed for one-way operation. However, if they are able to construct wider alleys than proposed in the master plan, they will be allowed to potentially allow two-way operation in the alleys pending staff review and approval. Condition 20 is relating to the improvements to the O'Neill Street frontage of the development, and condition 21 is a standard condition relating to any conflicts. And finally, staff has provided a recommended statement of consistency and reasonableness. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. The applicant is also here and prepared to make a presentation.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Howell? And could you go back one slide? I just got a question.
Which one?
Just go back one slide to the condition right there. On, and this is just for information. On recommendation 18, on internal, for the internal roadways, why would we give them the option? Because you often hear about HOAs and subdivisions, years later, the roads deteriorate, they do not have the funds to maintain the road. Why wouldn't we require the road to be built at the town standard initially so they can be adopted by the town?
So that condition, it was specifically came out of discussions between the applicant and staff through the technical review committee review. There was concerns by our engineering department and our public works department about the where the road how the roadway, the internal roadway was designed and where it ended. Generally speaking, our Public Works and Engineering Department, they do not like taking on dead-end roads if possible. And so it was a combination of that. And then the other thing is, at this point, the applicant has not decided how the townhomes may be parked. And so if they are parked through a parking lot or through on-street parking, the town does not want to maintain essentially a street that's also a parking lot. And so it was a combination of those two things, which is why we wrote this condition in order to provide some flexibility in how the roads, require that the roads be designed and built to town standard, but provide some flexibility on ownership of the roads, because the town may not want to take ownership and maintenance of the road.
All righty, thank you. Mr. Powers?
Just as a continuation on that, if there are reasons, and I'm assuming that there would be, that the town would not want to take the ownership of these roads built the way they might be built, why doesn't the town tell the developer how to build the roads? The design, make the design compatible with what the town wants.
And this condition requires that. So this condition requires that the roads be built to town standards. It just does not necessarily require the town to take those roads over. So the internal roadways will still be built to our public road standards.
Okay, I can understand that, but without the town taking them over, that's real good when it first opens. But in 3 years or 5 years, as Mr. Moore said, if the roads deteriorate, the town would be taking care of them if they were the town roads. We don't know if the HOA will be taking care of them. You can go right down the road to Riverwood and see stuff that was built there, and the manholes, meters, and everything else in the street were not adjusted for 20 years. And the town should not be allowing that to happen at this point in time.
Yeah, and that is something you can certainly recommend a revision to that condition, and with the idea that the way the condition's worded, and the reason it's required to be maintained by a homeowner association, the idea and the hope is that the homeowners association would be funded by dues paid by the property owners and the development, and would be able to take on any potential maintenance that's needed. However, that is something that the board, if that's a concern of the planning board, you can certainly discuss with the applicant the, desire to strengthen that by requiring a certain minimum. One thing that we've been talking about actually with the new Unified Development Ordinance, some language we've been looking at is potentially requiring that a developer, when they create an HOA, prove that it provide us a set cash infusion to that HOA at the very beginning, so that we as staff know, as we're approving a development, that HOA is going into it having some funding in place. Because as we all know, there are situations where when the HOA gets turned over to the property owners from the developer, there have been circumstances in the past where an HOA starts out with low to no funds. So that's something we're looking at with the new Unified Development Code, but new Unified Development Ordinance, but right now we do not have that language in the code. But that's certainly something that you could discuss with the applicant and see if they would be amenable to revising that condition.
Thank you. Ms. Bagley?
Ben, so is it safe to say that the townhomes and apartments are going to be home-owned?
Likely the townhomes would be. Generally speaking, townhomes are on individual lots. However, we cannot regulate ownership. So what we regulate is whether it's on its individual lot or not. Now, whether, the developer retains ownership of all the lots and rents out the townhomes, we cannot regulate that.
Okay, I'm assuming with an HOA, there must be some ownership going on in there.
Yes, but you could have an HOA that is essentially a management association as well, that if all the lots are still owned by one entity, they could create a management association, or they could create a homeowner association where they are the sole homeowner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Dupree?
Ben, is the town at all concerned? This is kind of an odd-shaped piece of property, and I realize there's only really one spot where this touches O'Neill. But is there any concern that there's one in and one out, and it's on a hill and a curve on a very busy road?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a concern about, when access is limited like that. However, we do have to allow development to occur. If we said nothing could happen, so our code as written allows for up to 30 lots on one access, or allows for up to 100 apartment units on one access. It does not speak to when it's a mixture of units. And so that is why the condition has been recommended that no more than 30 total lots. So for example, they could have 29 townhomes and then one lot of all the apartments, which in that case, they would actually be under their 130 unit maximum. But that's sort of how we tried to address what I would call the sort of missing part of the code right now when it comes to access.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I do. Is there a way, maybe this is an applicant question, but is there something in the future that there's a possibility of having another way in or out in that development? I can't picture it in my head, but just curious.
So as you'll see on the master plan, the applicant has provided for 2 future cross-connection stubs. So as the property on either side were to be developed, those stubs would have to be connected. And so the hope would be that the property on either side, as they develop, they would ultimately have additional access out to O'Neill Street. And so through that cross-access, there would be additional access.
Is that a recommended condition that we could state for future?
I believe Condition 16 addresses the future cross-access stubs. And one further thing I'll note too is that this project did go through, I believe it was 3 rounds of our technical review committee review, which included our fire staff that looked at it for fire code. And the fire code has recently been amended to increase the number of units that can be accessed off of one access. Our Unified Development Code currently is still less than what the fire code allows. And so from a fire code standpoint, that was looked at and discussed around the access and deemed that it met fire code.
Yes.
Based on her question, I don't know what the law is on this, and I'm sure you do. In the future, there's no question, property on the other properties are going to get developed over here. We know that will happen. Where they're stubbing out to connect to those other properties, if the current applicant is not the developer of those properties and someone else comes along, decides to do it, does the town have the authority to then require that development to connect to the stub in this development?
That is a really good question. And depending on how the other property is developed, I would say yes and no. I think that is something that we're trying to address in the new Unified Development Ordinance, to try and require that if there's a street stub that you connect to it. So remains to be seen if we can truly have that language in there, but that is something we're working towards. When these things have happened in the past, town staff always pushes very hard to ensure a design is made to connect to it, because frankly, too, generally the other developments will connect to that because it provides them a secondary access as well. There have been cases where, a stub has been there for a number of years and a new development comes in and they don't want to connect. We have a situation of that right now, but if it comes to that connection is needed to provide additional access, then they would have to connect.
Are the stubs required by code?
Yes. Yep.
All right, so my question, what kind of studies have been done about capping the schools? We just approved the one for Academy Point, right? And right down the street now we're having Highland Park. And I'm assuming that you're gonna have 1 or 2 kids in these units. And so the Clayton High School, Cooper, I'm pretty sure that they're capped out. So going forward, what kind of studies are we doing to make sure that we can get our kids to and from school safely, and we're not putting stress on the school system to be able to give them the education that they need?
And that is one of the more difficult things to address as a town, when we look at development, because we don't have control over schools. So as far as any future studies, I would have to defer to the Johnson County schools. My understanding is that they are working on some, I believe they do have a bond that has passed, and they are working on some school improvements and new schools. But from the town perspective, we have very little that we can do to require development to address a school need. We provide the information as information, but there's not really much that we can do as a town to address the school issue.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, when you're talking to the schools, when you're doing the development, are we talking to the school systems to make sure that they can, and so I understand what you're saying, that from the town, we can't do anything, but I want to make sure the communication is flowing, because I do drop my kids off at school. It takes 30 minutes, traffic is terrible, and when you start adding 200 or 300 more homes and another 33 homes, and it's just, we're building all these homes, but the school system, the commercial spaces that we need to be able to provide for these people that are moving in, that's not been developed.
Yeah. We do communicate with school systems, so they do keep up with us. They are aware of developments as we approve them. I believe they are on our list of our technical review committee list, where they do receive the information about the developments, but historically they have not really provided much feedback.
Thank you. Board Member Dupree.
This is nothing that you can do anything about. There's nothing anybody in this room can do anything about, but we do have a Clayton council member here. It would be really nice, Johnston County, and I'm only saying this so it's a matter of public record now. Johnston County is one of the top 10, I think it may be, it's either 7 or 9 fastest growing counties in the nation. Clayton is without question the fastest growing town in Johnston County, which means we're one of the fastest growing towns in the nation. But we've got 3 separate entities. You've got the county commissioners who do their thing, you've got the school board who do their thing, and you got the town who does its thing. I would just recommend that those entities get together and form some kind of a committee to at least have representation from the school board, the county commissioners, and the town of Clayton to talk about the fact that, I know the school, we can't wait till the school builds a new school and lifts the cap before we start building things in Clayton, because they will not until we've outpaced the ones that are there. So, it's the chicken or the egg sort of situation. But I really do think that those entities need to get together and talk about, not only that, but if you look at O'Neill Street, when I was looking at the Academy Point that we approved a minute ago, O'Neill Street is getting busier and busier and busier every day. I come down that street every day. It's crazy how many cars are going through that street. And you got the 25-mile zone, which you get one person who decides they want to go 25, and you got 1,200 cars behind them, or you get the one person who wants to go 85. That all happens. But if the state or whoever decided to come through and widen that road, I don't know how you would, because we've got apartments now built right up to the street on both sides and building more every day. I don't know where you'd widen the road at. So I feel like there's no long-term plan. We have a 2045 growth plan, but every week we deal with something that slightly exceeds it, but generally is close to it, but slightly exceeds it. So it continues to happen. I just think that the town and the county and the school board should get together and form some kind of a committee to look at
everything all at once, because Clayton's not getting smaller. And we got to have more schools, we got to have more roads, all of those things. Nobody in here can do anything about that, but I wanted to put it on the record.
All right, yes, sir.
Thank you. Board Member Applewhite?
Ben, on the approval criteria, number one, you said that this development was generally consistent with the adopted plans and policies of the town. You mentioned the 2045 growth plan. Can you expand a little bit on the definition of generally for you?
Well, from a density standpoint, it's consistent. It falls within that 3 to 5 units per acre range. I think where where there may be some concern is that in the growth plan, the medium density residential category really does not speak to apartments. It speaks to single-family detached and single-family attached units. And there's that 50% threshold for single-family attached units for the area, which the way that is meant to be read is when they say for the area, they mean for the entire, all the medium-density residential classified area, which is a bigger area than just this property. So those are things that, come into account when staff says generally consistent. It can be consistent, it can be considered consistent, and parts of it can be considered consistent, parts of it can be considered inconsistent. Generally, because the growth plan, again, is a high-level policy, we do, take a fairly liberal reading of it when we compare it to these developments.
Thank you. Yes, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So with that, you were looking particularly at the medium density, and do you consider that as a part of the smaller area that it's in, considering the developments that are across the river and those that are across the street and moving closer to town?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So
Board Member Lee?
just to clarify, to meet the minimum density development requirement, it would need to be single-family residential, not multifamily.
Correct, yeah. If it, to fully be consistent with 2045 growth plan in this land use classification area, I would have expected to see only single-family detached and single-family detached and single-family attached units.
Also, you gave a number also earlier about the 130 units as far as the second entrance, and allowing, seems to be there's a flaw in the analogy when you allow an apartment complex, a multifamily complex, to count as one unit in your number. And I wouldn't want that to go by. I'm saying it for the record. I think there's a major issue when you can have a multifamily unit count as one unit for our society on a secondary access. I think that really needs to be looked at by staff. And then as we work towards the 2045 plan and in our future meetings, really look at that, because that was eye-opening how we count a property. All right, thank you. Any other questions of staff? Oh, one more, Ben. Go ahead, Member Bagley.
I want to go on record as saying, I just think going forward, to Mr. Dupree's point, the 2045 growth plan, we put it there for a reason. We approved it for a reason. And if we keep inching away from it, I'm just saying this for the record, if we keep inching away from it, it's never gonna, it won't work, right? So I'd like to see us going forward, I'd like to just make a statement, go on record as saying, we've got to stay with that. And I will assume that would be staff's criteria as well moving forward.
But again, that is one of the jobs of this board, is to take that into consideration, and you can always recommend denial based on that. So I do encourage the board to, remember that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Thank you, Ben. Is there a representative of the applicant present? Yes, thank you.
Okay, while this loads, I will introduce myself. My name is Emily Beddingfield. I'm the Planning and Entitlement Manager for Lipscomb Development, so am here as the applicant this evening. 328 East Main Street, sorry, is the address for Lipscomb Development. A little bit of background on myself as I talk through this project. I am an urban planner. I have a master's degree in urban and regional planning. I am AICP certified through the American Planning Association, and I have been in the field working for over 15 years. The majority of that has been in the public sector, doing a lot of long-range planning, a lot of short-range planning, and a lot of everything in between. And of course, I've got a number of years of experience in the private sector as well. So just as I talk through some of these points, wanted to have that as my background. I'm sorry for this crackling. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know. There's something going on. Hello? All right. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to try my best not to repeat details that Ben went through, except maybe to address a couple of the questions that you guys had. Wanted to start off just by talking about where we are in the world, right? We are the golden star on the map there. You guys all know where this location is. It's about exactly 1 mile from the intersection of North O'Neill and Main Street. So we are sitting just outside of our downtown commercial center, definitely very close to all the services and amenities that our downtown has to offer. One thing that I thought as I looked at this map and I looked at the location, when you look at an aerial image of the property, I see a lot of green, I see a lot of undeveloped land, and it starts to look like maybe we're on a little bit of the outskirts of development in Clayton. And as we all know, we are absolutely not, right? A lot of the conversation this evening has revolved around how much development is taking place in Clayton, and specifically in this immediate area. This map was taken from the planning department's website, where there's the interactive development map. The areas in purple are under construction. The areas in yellow are under review. So there is a lot of interest, there's a lot of demand, and there is a very clear established pattern of ongoing development in this area. It's not just a pattern, it's something that we would expect, right? As I noted, we are very close to our downtown commercial center. So we expect people to come in and be filling in our undeveloped properties and looking for more places to build the commercial and residential units that are so desired in our community. So not only is it a pattern, it's also something that we have envisioned as a community. You all know this map, it's the future land use map from our 2045 growth plan. We've been talking about how shall we grow for decades, right? This one is obviously from a plan that was adopted a couple of years ago. The future land use map before this one was incredibly similar. If I had to venture a guess, the future land use map before that one was probably also really similar. And that's because it's not planning rocket science to know that you're going to expect higher densities of residential development close to your downtown core. And that's what we want, right? We want lots of development around our economic engine, which is our downtown. That's going to maximize use of our infrastructure. It's maximizing the amount of people that are going to come in and really create that boon for our downtown businesses. And it's also reducing miles traveled for the people who are coming into our town and traveling around our community. These are all good things. And the reason we have future land use maps and the reason we have comprehensive plans is because we need to be thinking decades out. These thought processes started a long time ago. The vision for properties like ours, which are designated as medium density residential at a density of 3 to 5 units per acre, however you define that, single family, multifamily, attached, It's all density, it's all number of units. It doesn't matter what it looks like, we're talking about number of units. And there's a specific number that was assigned to this location for very specific reasons. So just wanted to point that out. The future land use map designation of medium density, I know we talked about how the definition does talk about single family and 50% being attached single family. Those are sort of arbitrary numbers. Again, when I think about impacts of housing in an area, I'm thinking about total number of units. And that's something that is very easy to calculate when you're looking at a future land use map. We can easily look at how much land we have, how much is undeveloped, what densities are assigned to it, how many people are coming based on that expectation. Now, if I look at my 31.7 acres of property on this particular project, that's 158 maximum units that were anticipated for this specific piece of land for a very long time by our future land use map. Now, we aren't even proposing that. We're proposing 130 units. So again, we're coming in at just over 4 units per acre, less density than was anticipated by that future land use map. Again, for me, from a planning perspective, that can be apartments, it can be tree houses for all I care, right? We're talking about number of units, number of households, number of trips from a vehicular standpoint, number of people that are going to be engaging and living in our community. I wanted to take a minute and talk about kind of how we got here from a master plan perspective. I think it's easy to sometimes forget about all of the background work that goes into a project. You probably look at a master plan like this and it's very simple looking, right? But there's a lot of due diligence that has gone into this project and has gone into it from our perspective. That's just smart, right? You want to make sure that you have a feasible project as you move forward. We've done complete survey work of the site of existing conditions, including topography, boundary, utilities, existing infrastructure. We had an environmental consultant come out to the site to identify natural resources, including streams and stream buffers and wetlands. We've verified location of 100-year floodplain. We've worked with our engineer to utilize the survey information to identify areas where the slope is greater than 25%. We've worked with our engineer to do an overall site feasibility assessment and ensure that it is indeed something that is able to be developed to meeting the vision that we have. We've also walked the site multiple times, which is a really great way to just get a feel for how this project is developing. Needless to say, we are very committed and very excited about this project and where it could potentially go from here. The street layouts are one of the first things that we look at. As we've discussed, there's only room for a single entrance. It's sort of a unique configuration of a site. It's bound by natural features and existing development, and then large vacant lands to the west, leaving us just with that one opportunity for an entrance. The street layout generally follows the ridge, follows the highest elevations of the land. That's pretty typical design for a property, just minimizes your grading, and it's sort of a natural following of the curvature of the land in that way. The way that the configuration of the site is, it's a narrow entrance. We're going to have a really long, relatively really long entrance street here. It's about 350 or 400 feet until you even get to an area of development, which I'll talk about in a second. And it'll ultimately end up at a roundabout. The roundabout was chosen really just from a visual perspective, more so than anything. We felt that it would help set a tone. We thought it would be a nice amenity, something landscaped in the middle. Again, we're trying to set a high standard of development for this project, and at this stage of the design process, it's little things like that that we're doing to make that happen. Wanted to talk about why we chose the locations of the stub streets or cross-access streets. The western stub we chose specifically for its ability and feasibility of connection to that western property. I know there was a question about whether they were obligated to connect or not. regardless of how that turns out, we wanted to make sure that if and when one day that property gets developed, they have a feasible, logical connection point. And so what we did is we looked at the topography of the property to the west and made sure that we were lining that up with sort of their ridge. Remember, I said a street design is generally going to follow a certain pattern based on topography that's there today, and wanted to make sure that we weren't setting them up for failure as far as a connection point. The street stub to the east was specifically located because it's hard to see on this map, but there are two properties there. One fronts on O'Neill Street and one is a landlocked property. And by providing the stub in that location, we are able to provide access to both of those properties with one road. We're proposing a landscaped median entrance for this project, barring any issues with a permit from DOT or something like that. Again, that's a visual choice. We feel like it will help amenitize the site, will help set the tone for the standard of quality that we expect to see and that we want to set for people who are driving into this neighborhood. Again, it's a long street. It's going to be very well buffered, this community, from O'Neill Street visually speaking. As you're driving down O'Neill Street, if you remember that master plan, there's a lot of property sitting between the actual developed site and traffic on O'Neill. So it's not going to be a lot of development up on the street. There's going to be a lot of forested or single-family development homes that currently exist along O'Neill that'll be in between those two. DOT is going to require turn lanes. That's something that we work out the ultimate nitty-gritty details of during our engineering design phase, but they have reviewed this plan, and their initial comments were simply what we expected and would anticipate, which is that turn lanes will be required. We did complete a driveway certification. That's not something that was required, but it's something that ultimately DOT will require in order to allow us to place a driveway here. What that means is we had our engineers go out to the site. They looked left, they looked right, and they made sure that we hit the minimum visual distances that you need when exiting the community. And that's called a driveway certification. So we wanted to make sure as part of our due diligence that we were able to achieve that standard, and we were well more than the minimum on that one. As Ben noted, we did complete a traffic memo by using a traffic engineer, and we fall underneath the threshold set by the town for a traffic impact analysis, so we did not have to submit one of those. But we will have to provide frontage improvements along our section of O'Neill Street, consistent with whatever the requirements of the adopted transportation plan are. One of the things I am most excited about with this project is the opportunity to connect to Sam's Branch Greenway. I'm sure you all know, hopefully y'all have been on it. It's at least 40 miles, maybe more now, of uninterrupted asphalt greenway, barring the closures that take place here and there. And it's also part of the Mountains to Sea Trail and East Coast Greenway. I think it is so cool that when we develop a site like this and we connect to it, we're automatically connecting all of our residents to what is essentially a huge, long linear park. And this project provides us a great opportunity to do that, and an opportunity to implement a portion of our adopted pedestrian plan, which does call for connections in this area. The little map I have up there was taken directly from that adopted pedestrian plan. Once you hop on the trail, you're 1 mile to Municipal Park, you're 1 mile to the future Loop Road Park, of which the soccer fields should be getting installed in short order here. And a master plan for that park is going to kick off in the near future. The development will, of course, have sidewalk connectivity throughout, and with sidewalks connecting down to North O'Neill. As you can see on the map, there's not currently sidewalks extending up O'Neill as far as this project yet. But the pedestrian plan calls for side paths, which is a greenway running alongside the road along this portion of O'Neill Street. And assuming the town does move forward with implementing the recommendations of that pedestrian plan, we can anticipate connectivity by that side path from our community into the downtown sidewalk network when that occurs. And we're only a half a mile from the sidewalk network on that side of the road and about a quarter mile from the sidewalk network on the opposite side of the road. So again, there's a little bit of a question of use here, right? So how did we come up with the idea of apartments and townhomes, and why didn't we do detached single-family lots? So with one entrance, as Ben noted, we would be limited to 30 single-family dwelling units. That's by the town's Unified Development Code and formally by the fire code. However, apartments are an entirely different category from a safety perspective. They have a lot more protections as far as sprinklers and things of that nature that make it where it is a lot more logical to have that many more units compared to having single-family units. It's a far lower number. We looked at doing single-family on this lot, and quite frankly, with 30 units, it just does not work from a development perspective. We wouldn't even be able to fund the Greenway connection. Also, if we only put 30 units, it would be less than 1 unit per acre, which would make development of this site grossly inconsistent with our adopted future land use map. And if we're talking about implementing our future land use map, if we only developed this as single-family residential, we would be doing the exact opposite of that. So that's why we arrived at 130 units. Really, it's a question of implementing our future land use map. And if that calls for 3 to 5 units, I, as a planner, feel very comfortable in whatever form that's going to take in order to get us there. And for this particular piece of property, it was the right choice. Doing so also allows us to cluster that development. Obviously, we're naturally constrained by all of the conservation areas on the site, but the apartments allow us to even further cluster it. So we're doing 2 things. We're preserving all of those natural areas as well as meeting our density goals, both from the development perspective and from the town's perspective. As I noted, over 50% of the land will be preserved thanks to that sort of conservation design that allows us to be really conscious of how we're grading and operating within the site. It is a beautiful site. Down by Sam's Branch Creek is absolutely lovely. We're excited for that to be an amenity for the residents as they go through there on the new Greenway option. One of the recreational options that we're looking at is sort of a trail path that would traverse through the forest so that people could take advantage of the forested areas that are on this property. We're going to be working with an architect to design each individual building and place each individual building such that they're taking maximum advantage of all of those wooded views. There's not a lot of underbrush out on this site. It's a lot of pine trees and oaks in that resource area that will be conserved. So where these apartments are going to be placed, they're really going to be able to look out over those slopes and into the forest area, and it'll really be a nice amenity for the future residents. As I discussed, we do have the Greenway connection absolutely proposed as part of this and is a very important part of the project for us. And we have committed to providing 1 or more of the following, including neighborhood green, a mini park, or the maintained natural path. And I have a couple examples up there of what that could look like. Our master plan is not very prescriptive when it comes to building design. The images that I included were our inspiration photos that we used. But importantly, we are prohibiting vinyl siding and instead looking towards fiber cement, your hardy board siding. There will be mixture of elements, brick, stone, potentially wood in the form of shake. Vinyl shake or shingle would be permitted. As been noted, guest parking throughout will be 1 space per 4 units. That is not required for the townhomes, but we will be providing that additional guest parking for the townhomes to ensure that we are not underparked on the site. These next couple slides, again, these are our inspiration photos that we're using and that we're going to hand over to our architect to speak to the general design and style and quality that we would anticipate placing on the site. I won't speak much to utilities because that was covered by staff, but it's all town utilities. And again, our feasibility analysis has confirmed that we can make these connections. Our goal with the stormwater ponds is to design them as an amenity. In our master plan, we showed one actually with a road looping around it, which means that homes would be looking out over it. Typically, what that means with stormwater ponds is you're installing more landscaping and really just taking a front-end look at the design, whether that be through your engineer or through a landscape architect, to ensure that you're really looking at the visual final effect of these ponds. We'll have a high-quality entry sign as you enter the development. Again, it's all about setting that tone, setting that feel for this little community in the woods. As been noted, we have addressed all of the conditional zoning criteria as well as the master plan criteria. I'm not going to go through them, but if there's any questions, we're more than happy to speak to those. And that is all I have. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? Board Member Powers?
If you could go back to your map with the street stubs. Thank you. When I look at this map, and this is not a negative question, I see 4 street stubs. You mentioned 2.
Oh, absolutely. The 2 are that on the south side, closest to the entrance, those are the 2 that provide cross-access. So when I say stub street, what I'm specifically speaking to is the cross-access streets that would provide future access to properties that are not part of this project. The 2 stub streets that you see within the project boundaries, those will connect in some way to the overall development. So it's not a stub per se, it's just kind of saying that traffic will continue in that direction and we have not fully designed that yet.
Okay. Same question on the one to the left of the traffic circle. Why would that not be extended the short distance to the property line?
So that's a great question. When we first designed this, we did, but not knowing how that property to the west was going to be developed, we wanted to leave that option kind of open. The intent right now would be to leave that little area of land that would be, if you would imagine the extension of that all the way to the property line, to leave that undeveloped so that one day when we know what's coming next door, if it makes sense at that time to provide a connection, absolutely, we would be happy to partner with that development company at that time to make that happen. Not knowing what's coming next door, we don't know. It could be developed in a way that would not be beneficial to our future residents. So we wanted to provide that definite connection down to the south. And as it stands right now, if that connection's not made, it would be smoothed out. It won't look like a stub. It'll be smoothed, and then maybe one day in the future, we'll talk to a future developer about a connection, but that would be a modification to this plan down the road and is not included here.
That's generally why I was asking, because the first 2 down the bottom there, you have no idea at this time what's going to happen on either side there. Of the one up top at the circle, you have no idea what's going to happen there. The first 2 you're extending out, the third one you're not. The other one I have a kind of a question about is the interior stub. Why would you, if that's going to be a stub, why would you not have a cul-de-sac or something like that there?
Oh, that won't be a stub. That's just, I know it looks like a stub, but the arrow is really meant to depict that. It won't look like that. It will be a natural progression, whether that be into a parking area or some sort of a cul-de-sac. Again, not having engineered out the site, we're just not 100% sure what that's going to look like. So it just leaves it open.
Thank you.
Right now, they're all proposed as private roads because the town was not willing to take over any of the roads. They did say that in the future, as we go through the design, to speak to that question of road ownership, as we go through the engineering design phase, if the town at that point wants to take ownership of the streets, we would love for them to. That would be fantastic. But they told us they did not want them at this stage, which is a very typical stance to take. You don't typically see with apartment communities and apartment townhome communities. It's very common for those to be under private ownership. If you look at the East Village apartments, if I'm calling them the correct name, those are all private streets, right? So it's a common strategy for the town to not take ownership of those streets.
Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant? Yes, Board Member Applewhite.
So you had mentioned there is a limitation on the amount of single-family homes that can be developed for one entrance into a site. So is that really the reason why apartments and townhomes were chosen rather than a single-family development
That was the driving reason. Kind of for fun, I did look at what it would look like to develop the entire site as single family. And frankly, I wasn't comfortable with the amount of grading and clearing that would necessitate. I'm a conservationist at heart, and I loved how much land we're able to preserve and how much of a buffer even against the 25% slopes we're able to provide with this. When we looked at really laying out the single family lots in a manner that would make this a feasible development site, it was starting to push towards the edges and it just felt very closed in. Whereas this, I think the amenities for the residents are really going to be not that you have your own yard, but that you have this whole wooded area and you've got that trail at your doorstep. I think that's going to be people's backyards, right? Is getting out onto the trail or getting out into the community that way.
That also applies to townhomes that would have been considered.
It does, yes.
So my other question would be, as far as assuming this map that you put in front of us, that you would drive in townhomes generally as you were to come into the development, and then you would arrive at the apartment complex, and in your vision and the vision of the applicant, surrounded by trees along kind of the perimeter around where you're going to have your steeper slopes, your wetlands, closer to the trails and the trail connections. And is there, and you have mentioned a plan to preserve as many trees as possible on the site to ensure that it has that sort of adequate nature feel to the development?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, there's only so much you can do when you're grading. Actually, the biggest driver of that tends to be the road. Just getting the road built to the town standards, and then grading away from that in a way that you're not just dropping off, tends to be a huge part of the reason that you get that much clearing, and then you kind of put the buildings in after that. But we are going to work with an architect. So, for example, instead of, say, for an apartment building, just pad grading out one big flat site, maybe with a retaining wall on the back so we can stick a building on it, we're going to have the architect work to design the building to meet the grade of and that's going to reduce our overall grading needs. It's going to reduce sort of that retention wall effect that you might see. It's going to make it overall look a lot more natural.
Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'll now turn it over to the board for their consideration. Any comments from the board? Oh, my fault. I got it, Ben. I'm sorry. Is there any member of the public would like to speak on this, item 5B? This particular, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
My name is Carrie Lee, 221 East 2nd Street. I've learned a lot from coming to this meeting about what the planning board is able to do and what they're not. So I just would like to challenge you again to uphold our 2045 plan. I'm concerned about traffic again on O'Neill Street. And I think that I'm very hopeful about the development. I think it's an amazing idea. But how can we work together to think about that it does matter in the future if we have tree houses or apartments or whatever? It does matter. We want to have opportunities for different families that look to Clayton to say, ooh, I want to live here, but my options are very limited in what's available because they're apartments or they're townhomes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to bring other ideas in and make it the best it can be, because there's a lot of amazing opportunities that are being presented, and I'm excited. I just push the planning board to think about how we can make it the best it can be. So thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Any other member of the public? But thank you. Hearing none, now I will turn it over to the board for their consideration. Any comments from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to recommend or not recommend this to council.
I'll make a comment briefly. I think in looking at the parcel, I think there's an incredible opportunity to maintain a very important aesthetic, not only to the town, but to the residents that live there. And going through the staff packet prior to coming to the meeting, I think that, I felt like there would be a great opportunity for there to be the perhaps larger lot, larger home, single-family development on this parcel, recognizing that even when you do the density calculation, if you would subtract all the land that's perhaps not buildable, that your density calculation would change. I do recognize that is not how it's done, but then also recognizing the applicants have their property, and they have the right to build on it what they think is best, and also to meet the financial obligations and the time that they've put into it. So I think we're at a challenging spot where we want to see a certain type of development, but we're going to be limited to what is going to be offered to this board and then ultimately to town council. I would be interested in hearing from staff what opportunities there are to ensure that the development ultimately, whether it's through conditions or agreements through staff and the applicant, to ensure that the natural aesthetics, whether it be through trees or otherwise, are preserved as best as possible. I think the applicants have mentioned they're already in the process of doing that, but do we need to impose a condition or otherwise to ensure that those things are met?
Yeah, so, I mean, really when it comes down to it, the best way to do that is through conditions in this type of development, in this type of application. So we do have, a couple of conditions that require the preservation. We have one, number 17, that requires a minimum 50% of the site area be preserved as resource conservation area and open space. There's a large percentage of that area that by our code has to be preserved anyways, because it equates to the resource conservation area, but there is that condition. I mean, so that's really the only condition we currently have. If there's a specific condition that the planning board would like to see, or an idea of a condition that the planning board would like to see around, tree preservation or something to that extent, you certainly can, ask the applicant about if they would be agreeable to a condition like that. But that's really probably really doing a condition or working on additional conditions would be the best way to get to what you're looking for.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessary to impose an additional condition, but I think it's, and as the applicants are here to be mindful of that as an important aesthetic to this development, and points moving forward, particularly when it's going to be this close to a very important artery through Clayton in the Greenway, to ensure that we continue to maintain the aesthetics and the character of that part of the community.
Thank you. We're back at, I'll entertain a motion to recommend or not recommend item 5B. 2022-163-CZM Highland Park Conditional Zoning District to the Town Council.
I make a motion to approve 2022-163 CZM Highland Park Conditional Zoning District. We find the rezoning action to be generally consistent with the future land use map and the adopted 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan. And we find this rezoning action reasonable and in the public interest because it supports goals LU1 and LU3 of the 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan by encouraging growth in appropriate areas and providing a range of housing types and lot sizes to meet the needs of various income levels, family sizes, and ages.
We have a motion to recommend by Board Member Dupree. Do we have a second?
I second.
Second by Board Member Williams. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Recommendation passes. The next item on the agenda is 5C, 2022-215-RZ, Bobby H. Hardy rezoning. We're now hearing from staff.
Evening, Board. This should be a little more straightforward. I think Director Howell and all of you for doing the heavy lifting today on the other two. Before you today, we have a rezoning application. The property owner is seeking to rezone from residential estate to industrial heavy. The lot size is approximately 31 acres. Currently, this parcel is vacant. The site is located just south of the current Ashcroft subdivision, just below that blue line there on the map. I believe it's the Sam's Branch Greenway there. You can kind of see it's also south of that as well. As I stated before, the current zoning is the RE, which is our residential estate zoning district. If you were to recommend the approval and this went to Town Council and they approved it, below would be what the proposed zoning map would look like. It would now be industrial heavy, which is I2. You can see on the proposed zoning map and the current that to the south and somewhat to the east there, we also already have some current industrial heavy I2 zoning districts present. We've spoken a lot about future land use map here today. I'm happy to report that this is in line with the future land use map as it's shown here. This is part of our employment center, and the employment center does call for uses such as this. The employment center encourages industrial, warehouse, office, research and development, tech flex, hospital, renewable energy, recycling, fabrication, assembly, and other technology uses within that proposed area. Considerations for you today, if you were to recommend this rezoning for approval, all uses that are permitted in the I2 industrial heavy zoning district would be permitted by right on this site, and that the zoning would run with the land. After reviewing, staff does recommend approval of this rezoning request. We provide a statement of consistency and reasonableness should you decide to recommend this request to Town Council. If you have any questions, I'm available for them, and the applicant is here to answer questions as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Yes, Ms. Board Member Bagley.
Yep. I just wondered, when it says for Caterpillar Inc. testing site within the town, what does that encompass? Like, what does that involve?
Sure, yeah. If let me go back. The property to the south and to the east there is owned by Caterpillar Incorporated. And then if we go back to the arrow, we can see that much of that area that they own there, it looks like it's to be testing grounds for their equipment for research and development.
So it'll just be to house their equipment, almost like a stationary.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. This rezoning is not related to Caterpillar.
Okay.
This is the Bobby Hardy rezoning, that is the adjacent property and uses there.
Okay, so
I apologize.
what is actually going to be happening in this property?
At this time, I believe the applicant could speak to that. I would remind the planning board that we're considering the rezoning request here and the switch to the I-2. We have to be prepared that any uses that are permitted in that could be accepted, but I believe the applicant could speak to any future uses.
Any other questions of staff? Yes, Board Member Applewhite.
This is a general rezoning that would allow all permitted uses under I-2.
Correct, yes.
What kind of uses?
Sure, just off the top of my head, and this won't be the exact or full list, we have things like manufacturing, there'll be research and development, there's different levels of manufacturing as well, there'll be, I'm so sorry, I'm drawing a little blank, there's a bit more, I'd be happy to look those up and find more to you.
The better question would be, is of the industrial zoning districts, is this considered more heavier use?
Yes, this is the more intense zoning district. Mhm.
All righty, thank you. Any other questions for staff? All right. Yeah, Board Member Applewhite.
Sorry, and then how does, where is the access to this site? How do you get to the site currently?
I believe in the access, the applicant can address that too. There is a small, I believe, an access easement going through another additional property there, but they'd be happy to speak to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions of staff? Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
We're now here from the applicant.
Thank you. I'm Drew Hardy, speaking on behalf of Bobby Hardy. So what we have here, the Hardy name goes back in Clayton over 6-7 generations, and we purchased this farm in 1957.
Excuse me, could you speak into the microphone?
Yes, sir, in 1957. So what we have on this farm now, we have a legal LCID landfill, which is organic material for clearing lots and stuff, which is what we've been talking about all day. And we've been in this, like I said, the community for the last 6-7 generations, from clearing lots and having mules haul them off to the track hose we use today. So we have a landscaping and grading business. And we operate out of 2019 Hardy Lane, which is the Red Barn facility, mulch yard on 70 Highway in Clayton. This is an essential business of what we operate over here now, because we clear lots, and it's private for us and who we take in and take out over there. So this area, we're just looking to extend what we do now, keep it private. We have a great relationship with CAT, and they're already zoned industrial too as well. So it's a neighboring piece of land and property there for us. But the main thing I want to let you guys know too, we keep it clean, keep it neat, don't want any extra traffic going in and out. We live on that property. My father, my brother, my cousin, and I'm building a home over there now. So the property is well maintenance, have cows on it still, and it's just a lower piece of the land that we could potentially use for our own usage in the future. And that's kind of where we sit right now, and we'll stockpile, we'll grind once a year. We use topsoil screener, grinding for the mulch yard, the retail sales in Clayton up here, and stockpiling dirt and too for different neighborhoods and that have to stockpile dirt and get rid of dirt that are being built in the area. So then we can reuse the dirt and have somewhat of a recycling facility in the area for all the listed items we just talked about. But that's what we're looking, kind of broad right now, but looking to do by getting this rezoned industrial.
All righty, thank you. Any questions of the applicant?
I've got one.
Board Member Dupree?
The way it's currently zoned, is there any use, help me, I guess, to understand. I mean, I basically understand, but is there a use you're not able to do there now that you want to be able to do?
Yeah, well, we're looking to maybe potentially have a facility where we can recycle and grind, kind of doing exactly what we're doing, but do it at the bottom area. The top area on the farm, we own all the way out to O'Neill Street up here. And that farm, you can see the green acreage right here. That's the cows on cow farm. Behind, past the pastures, is the homes that we live in up there. And then we have a shop down there And we're looking to extend, if we need to get down to the bottom down there, this parcel 200T is the area that could potentially, because the landfill that's there now will be capped out after, and it's a organic material, all for lot clearing, will be capped out at 2026. So potentially more so for placing the product there and grinding it and then reusing it at our Red Barn facility.
Thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Bagley?
Sorry, I'm not too familiar with that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering what type of noise, does that incur pollution, smells, odors, waste? What's?
No, ma'am, it's all organic trees, yard, not even, just where we clear lots, stumps and trees. And then, like you said, you have a grinding process, come down there and we rent it a couple times a year. So it's not a daily occurrence either. But it's nothing new that we're not already doing in this area for the last 30, 40 years.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, still do. Yeah. Yeah, all of it. Yeah. Oh, yeah, my cousin and all my family. So we want to keep it farmland and pretty and appealing for us to drive through. So it's not a big facility we're trying to create, like I said, a bunch of traffic on it now. We want to keep it the family farm. I mean, my kids to grow up over there, so. Yeah. And then some of us lumber that we stockpile and we send to the lumber yard. And based upon all the development in the area, it's an essential business that we have to have in this area for all the growth.
I think that's why, to Mr. Dupre's point, I was wondering just like why we needed to rezone it if you're already doing that.
Well, it's a lower area that we're looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah, the LCID landfill. That's already permitted and approved by the state, and we have to stay in compliance, keep everything, and it essentially helps us as well, because we clear lots, and that's what we do for a lot of builders in this area, but that's all maintained and monitored by the state also.
Thank you.
No problem, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir, appreciate it.
Is there any member of the public that'd like to speak on this particular issue? Hearing none, I'll turn.
The public, if y'all want to speak, now's the time.
And you're not required to.
Not required, just your option.
You want to get up and say, we live by the property, we're 100 feet from where you want to go. And we were just concerned about what you were going to be building beside us, more than anything. And the water. I mean, we're on a well. We're not in the city limits. We've got 11 acres. Lot for this all this. We were just concerned about what's going to go behind us because it went to it doesn't, more than anything.
industrial can mean many things.
Yes, that's what they
It can be
said.
scary to an adjacent home. So we're trying to figure out, couldn't half hear what was said here. But what are you really gonna do with that property? It's different than now.
Nothing now. The Hardys are going to be doing exactly what they're doing now, which is clearing lots when property is developed, bringing in the trees and the stumps from the lots that are cleared, and then they grind them. They do a lot of recycling. So when they grind that material, they grind it into soil and sell it out in Red Barn on Highway 70. And they've developed
Excuse me.
seed soil.
Excuse me, if we're going to continue with the public comments, we probably need to come to the microphone, or we can have this conversation after the meeting. Does anybody want to come to the microphone?
They want you to, if you have something to say, they want you to come say it in the microphone as part of the public record. If you have that question, they want you to come up there and ask that question formally.
Yes, sir. Please state your name and your address, sir.
My name is Gary Rush, and my wife Janet and I live adjacent property to this proposal. And we're concerned, naturally, being a homeowner there of 26 years, what's going to happen different than what we've seen in the past. A personal gripe about this meeting, very poor that you hold a public meeting that people can't hear. This PA system stinks. I've had better PA systems in high schools. I'm trying to figure out still what's going to happen with this property that's different than it is now. Is there going to be pollution, noise pollution? Is there going to be environmental pollution? We have a creek that runs back of our house, runs through the property. And I have no idea right now what's changing. If nothing's changing, I'm not sure why is this presentation. That's what I want to know.
All right, that's fair. Thank you, sir. Does the applicant want to address that issue?
So in our plans, we don't
Just
plan
speaking
on,
to the microphone.
we don't plan on changing much as of right now or building in the future at all. We just plan on continuing doing what we do on the farm anyways. And where his property is, it's a 30-acre plot, but we're only really utilizing the front 3 or 4 acres that's not close to his, and there'll be no pollutions or no hazardous material brought in or out. And the back property that connects to the neighboring property will actually stay like a horse pasture, cow pasture. So we have no future plans at all, because once again, we live over there. We don't want to pollute anything. We have well water also. So all of that's taken into consideration for my home, my mother's home, my father's home, and my brother's and cousins. So that being said, if the processing center is the recycling area down there is just trying to make it industrial for future growth if we do grow, but we have no plans on going anywhere close to the backside of the property. That helps you out.
All right, thank you, sir. Now, I'll turn it over to the board for their consideration again. Any comments from the board? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to recommend or not recommend 2022-215-RZ Bobby H. Hardy rezoning to the town council.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval for 2022-215-RZ Bobby Hardy rezoning and I submit this statement of consistency and reasonableness. We find this rezoning action consistent with future land use map goal LU1, policy LU 1.1, strategy LU 1.1.1, policy LU 1.4, strategy LU 1.4.1 of the Comprehensive Growth Plan 2045. And we find this rezoning action reasonable and in the public interest, as this amendment furthers the objectives of the zoning ordinance and of the land and of those land out in the laid out. It's supposed to be laid out, not laid out. Okay, I was trying to read it and it was wrong.
I'd lay it on the brain,
So,
I think.
it furthers the objective of the zoning ordinance and of those laid out in the Comprehensive Growth Plan 2045. Sorry for that little mix-up there.
Thank you. We have a motion by board member to recommend by board member Liscum. Do we have a second?
I second.
Second by board member Williams. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. The motion passes for recommendation to town council. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is new business. Is there any new business? None.
I do agree with Mr. Rush that we all need to do a better job of speaking into the microphone. I guess I'm turning my head so you can't hear me good now. So it is a problem because
I don't think it's us.
well,
Even when you're speaking now, there's a little uneasiness with your microphone. I can't explain it.
because sitting right there, I had a hard time.
I think we hear each other fine. It's out there that you don't hear.
And I think the humming of, and I know we got to have air conditioning, but I think the humming of that, and I know background noise, the older I get, the more that bothers me. So I think that could be a little bit of an issue too, but we can't cut that off. So we've got to overcome it.
Of course, I think they were not going to hear us no matter what we were doing.
Also, and one last comment, piggybacking off of board member Dupree's earlier, Mr. Howe, I think that if you look at O'Neill Street and how busy it's getting, and especially when you get near downtown with the apartments right on the right-of-way, I think our representation with the MPO, we probably missed that window because the cost now of buying that land to expand O'Neill Street's not going to happen. I mean, and if you understand DOT and the cost of land buying, so I think we missed that window. Probably our representation didn't foresee to put that on the agenda a few years back when some of these plans were first developed in 17 and before it came to council. The county, all the municipalities have representatives on the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization with DOT, and that's how they plan and fund the monies for the roadway projects in the future. So I think as we're building more and more on O'Neill Street, which means I'm not going to say it publicly, I see the alternative streets and I feel for those landowners what may be to come to alleviate O'Neill Street in the future. But that's just something that our representation needs to think about. You have to look at the local streets in the development. I think we concentrated a lot on 42, 70, 540 instead of the internal. That's just my comment on that. Any other comments on the board?
I have a comment. Piggyback on what you said, I've been approached a few times about all of the development that's going on, but we still don't have, we're not looking out for everyone in Clayton, right? With all the new developments and the $200,000, $300,000 homes, $1,800 rent, when is something going to be presented to where the people in the town of Clayton can see that there's some affordable places to live for cafeteria workers and janitors and people like that don't have to live an hour away to come into Clayton and work at these restaurants and places like that. So that's why I keep bringing that up, that last time we discussed, maybe getting stuff in front of us before it's already been talked about so that the whole town of Clayton can see other things going on besides just high-end development.
Thank you. Any other board members? Any comments? Thank you for your comments, Mr. Nguyen. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Board Member Powers. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Board Member Williams. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.